This is the story of a quiet black boy named Malik, a gentle soul who walked the school halls with his head down and his violin case clutched close, mostly ignored, until one day, the teachers called him to perform in front of the whole school. But it wasn't to honor him. It was a setup. A joke. Something cruel disguised as a school activity. The students laughed. The teachers smirked. They all expected him to embarrass himself. But when Malik raised his violin and began to play, the room changed. The teasing stopped. The whispers faded. And all that remained was the music. Beautiful, soulful, and strong. Malik didn't just play the violin. He played the truth. And no one who heard it would ever forget it. Malik Johnson was used to being the new kid. He'd been in and out of schools more times than he could count, every move chasing a fresh start his mother hoped they'd finally find. But Asheville Middle School felt different. Not because it was bigger or cleaner or stricter. No, it was colder. Not just the Ohio wind that bit at his skin in the early mornings, but something else, something quieter. It lived in the stares he felt when he walked through the front doors. It echoed in the way teachers paused when they saw his name on their attendance sheets, fumbling, guessing. Malik, Malik. Welcome. That fake smile. That tight voice. It was all too familiar. Asheville was the kind of place where time stood still. The American flags in every classroom. The local diner that never changed its menu. A town where people knew each other by name and expected everyone to act the same. Malik was the only black student in his entire grade. From the moment he stepped off the bus, he felt it. The way conversations quieted when he walked by, the way kids stared just a little too long, like he was some new species they hadn't seen before. He didn't try to fit in. He'd learned long ago that it didn't matter how hard you tried. People saw what they wanted. And in Asheville, what they saw was someone who didn't belong. Malik was quiet. Not shy, just guarded. He sat in the back of the classroom, always by the window. He didn't speak unless called on, and even then, his answers were short, polite, calculated. But no matter where he went, he always carried one thing with him, an old, scratched-up violin case. The zipper was broken, the handle was fraying, and a few faded stickers clung to the surface like memories trying not to be forgotten. Some of the kids joked about it. One boy said it looked like Malik was carrying around a broken toaster. Another called it ghetto luggage. No one thought he could actually play what was inside. Most just assumed it was for show. But what they didn't know was that violin belonged to his father. Marcus Johnson had been a jazz musician. Not rich. Not famous. But talented in a way that didn't need fame to matter. He played in smoky bars, at family cookouts, in dim church halls. Music wasn't just his talent, it was how he lived. When Malik was little, his dad would play lullabies late into the night. Soft, soulful notes that wrapped around Malik like a blanket. That violin wasn't just an instrument, it was a voice. A memory. A connection to the man who'd been everything to him, and who was taken too soon. His father passed away from a heart attack when Malik was just 10. Sudden. Sharp. Unfair. After that, his mother packed up their lives and moved from place to place, taking whatever job she could to keep them afloat. Malik stopped unpacking fully in each new town. He stopped trying to make friends. But he never stopped playing. Every night, no matter the neighborhood, no matter how tired he was, Malik would open that case, tune the strings with careful hands, and lose himself in the only place that felt safe. His music. So when he arrived in Asheville, dragging that case behind him like a secret only he could understand, it wasn't just about music. It was about survival. That violin held everything he still had of his father. His strength. His identity. His home. But to the other kids, it made him stand out. And standing out, when you're already the only black boy in school, doesn't usually end well. "Yo, what is that?" one boy sneered in the hallway. What, you got that from the pawn shop or something? A group nearby laughed. Looks like he's trying to be the next Kanye, except, like, sad and broke. Malik didn't say a word. He never did. Not because he was scared. Because he knew better than to feed a fire that wanted to burn him just for existing. Some of the teachers weren't much better. One of them watched Malik open the case during study hall, frowned, and said, "We don't really allow extracurricular noise here, okay?" She didn't even ask what he was playing. She just wanted him to stop. To disappear. But what none of them knew was that Malik didn't need their approval. His dad taught him something more valuable than applause. He taught him discipline. Control. Soul. Malik didn't play for claps. He played because it kept his father alive in his heart. Still, day by day, the pressure mounted. The looks, the whispers, the jokes. And through it all, Malik said nothing. He just carried that violin. Like armor. Because deep down, he knew something they didn't. One day, they'd hear him. One day, they'd listen. And when that moment came, they wouldn't be able to look away. The days rolled on, but nothing changed. Malik kept to himself. Kept quiet. Kept playing. He never asked to be noticed, but sometimes, the world decides to notice you anyway. For all the wrong reasons. It started as whispers. Nothing new. A snicker here. A stare there. But then came Talent Day. A school tradition. One of those forced events where students were encouraged to show off their abilities. The posters said things like, "Share your spark," and "Everyone's got a gift." But for kids like Malik, those words didn't feel like an invitation. They felt like a setup. The morning announcements crackled to life one Monday. Talent Day sign-ups are open. Performances will be next Friday in the auditorium. The front office sounded excited. The kids. Not so much. Well, except for a few. Jake and Connor. Two of the loudest boys in class. Always first to make a joke. Always the ones pushing things just far enough to get a laugh without getting sent to the principal's office. And when they looked over and saw Malik quietly reading at his desk, violin case resting against his chair like always, they smiled in that way he'd seen before. That crooked, cruel kind of smile. "Hey, Teach!" Jake suddenly shouted, loud enough to catch everyone's attention. "Malik's got a talent. He plays violin or something, like that fancy orchestra junk." A few heads turned. Some laughed. One kid clapped mockingly. Connor leaned in, loud enough for the class to hear. "Yeah, let him play. Bet he learned it in juvie or something. Come on, let the brother serenade us." The teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, froze for a second. Then, to Malik's disbelief, she laughed. Just a little chuckle under her breath. She didn't correct them. Didn't stop them. She just smiled awkwardly and said, "Well, if he wants to, sure. That would be interesting." Interesting. That word hit harder than the jokes. She didn't ask Malik if he was okay with it. She didn't check if he'd signed up. She didn't even look at him. Just wrote his name down on the sign-up sheet in big, black letters. Malik Johnson. Violin. The class burst into scattered laughs and side comments. Someone in the back said, "He gonna play some rap on that thing?" Another voice called out, "What's it called, Beethoven in the Hood?" Every word was like a slap, but quieter. Sharper. The kind of pain you don't show on your face. Malik didn't say a word. He just stared down at his desk, his hands folded tightly in his lap. The weight of 100 eyes pressing into him, laughing at him. Not for what he'd done, but for who he was. And he realized in that moment, this wasn't about Talent Day. This was about targeting him. This was a stage they were building, just so they could watch him fall. When the bell rang, he walked out slower than usual. The violin case felt heavier somehow, like it carried more than wood and strings, like it carried expectation, mockery, pressure. He kept his head down, his footsteps steady, but inside, he was shaking. That night, Malik didn't eat dinner. He sat in his room with the lights off, the violin in his lap, his fingers tracing the grain of the wood like it could anchor him to something real. The words from class echoed in his head. The laughter. The look on Mrs. Reynolds' face. He opened the case slowly, tuned each string with aching precision. Then he took a breath and played. But it wasn't the soft, soulful lullabies he usually played. No, not tonight. Tonight, his music was fire. The notes came hard, fast, sharp. They rose and fell like waves crashing in a storm. Every stroke of the bow screamed what he couldn't say out loud. The betrayal, the rage, the shame. He played until his arms ached, until his fingertips throbbed, until tears rolled down his cheeks and dropped onto the strings. Because if they were going to force him onto that stage, they weren't going to see a joke. They were going to see Malik Johnson. The morning of Talent Day arrived, quiet and gray. The sky hung low with thick clouds, like even the weather knew something was coming. Malik stood at the bus stop, his violin case in hand, his breath forming soft clouds in the cold air. He didn't look nervous, but inside, his heart was pounding like a second metronome. Not out of fear. No, this was something else. A readiness. A storm waiting to be heard. When he walked into school, it felt like every head turned. Kids whispered behind half-covered mouths. One girl giggled as she passed him in the hallway and muttered, "Get ready for the concert." Someone else pretended to play the violin behind his back, making squeaky noises. Malik heard it all, but his face stayed still, calm, like stone. The auditorium buzzed with chatter and shuffling feet. Rows of folding chairs stretched out under cheap fluorescent lights. Teachers leaned against the walls, sipping coffee. Parents had been invited, but not many showed up. It was just the students, and the ones who planned the joke. Jake and Connor were sitting near the front, smirking like they'd already won. Their plan had worked. They got Malik on stage. Now all they had to do was watch him fall. "Hope you brought earplugs," Jake whispered to his friends. "This is gonna be painful." Backstage, Malik sat alone. No pep talk. No warm-up group. Just him, the squeak of old curtains, and the quiet ticking of the clock above. He opened his case carefully, as if it might shatter under pressure. Inside, his father's violin rested against the worn velvet lining. Familiar, steady, faithful. He didn't rehearse. He didn't need to. Every note he planned to play lived inside him already. This wasn't just music. It was a message. And they were all about to hear it. One of the teachers peeked behind the curtain. "Malik, you're up next." He stood slowly, bow in hand, violin in the other. His shoes tapped quietly across the wooden floor as he stepped toward the light. The stage wasn't big. The crowd wasn't huge. But in that moment, the silence felt enormous. Heavy. Thick with expectation. The kind that waits, just to break you. He took his place in the center. No microphone. No introduction. Just Malik. One black boy. One violin. And an audience ready to laugh. But he didn't rush. He closed his eyes. Took a deep breath. Then raised the instrument to his chin with the kind of grace you don't learn in school. The first note rang out, soft, clear, slow. So delicate you could hear a pin drop. And then the second came. Then the third. Each one fuller than the last. A melody began to rise, rich with warmth and pain. Something classical, but soulful. A blend of Bach and blues. Notes twisted together in a way no one expected. The laughter stopped. The whispers died. Connor leaned forward. Jake sat back in his chair, his smirk fading. Malik moved with purpose. His bow slid across the strings like silk on glass. His fingers danced, fast and sure, like they'd been waiting their whole life for this moment. And the music, it didn't just fill the room. It commanded it. The teachers blinked. One put her hand over her mouth. Even Mrs. Reynolds, who hadn't even bothered to ask if he wanted to perform, stood frozen in the corner, her coffee trembling in her hands. Because what they were hearing was not a joke. It was brilliance. And Malik. He didn't look at the crowd once. Not at Jake. Not at Connor. Not at anyone. His eyes stayed closed the whole time. His mind in a place they couldn't reach. A place filled with late nights and his father's voice, and the promise he'd made to himself that no one, not bullies, not teachers, not even this town, was going to silence him. When the last note faded, it hung in the air for a moment, echoing off the walls like a question that no one knew how to answer. And then, silence. Real silence. Not the mocking kind. Not the empty kind. The kind that only shows up when something beautiful has just ended, and no one knows what to say. Malik slowly lowered his violin. Still not looking at anyone. Still calm. He turned, walked off the stage, and disappeared behind the curtain like he had never even been there. But they knew. They had seen him now. And nothing they had expected could erase what they'd just heard. The curtain swayed gently as Malik stepped off the stage, violin tucked under his arm. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The sound of nothing, no laughter, no clapping, no snide remarks, said more than words ever could. He walked slowly down the narrow hallway behind the auditorium, his footsteps echoing on the old tile floor. For the first time in days, his shoulders felt light. The weight of shame, of mockery, of being the joke in someone else's game, lifted, gone. Not because he shouted. Not because he fought back. But because he spoke the only language he knew. Music. Back in the auditorium, no one moved. Not for a long, long time. Mrs. Reynolds blinked like she had just woken from a dream. She looked down at the clipboard in her hands, the same one she scribbled his name on without asking him. The same one where she'd laughed quietly as Jake and Connor turned a boy's talent into a punchline. She swallowed hard. The coffee in her cup had gone cold. Jake shifted in his seat, his arms crossed tight over his chest, but his face told a different story. He looked embarrassed. And Connor? He sat perfectly still, his eyes locked on the empty stage like maybe, just maybe, he could rewind what had just happened. One student clapped. Soft. Unsure. Then another joined. Then more. And before long, the room filled with slow, staggered applause. Not the wild, thundering kind meant for celebration, but something quieter. Something deeper. Like they were apologizing through their hands. Malik didn't hear it. He had already slipped out the back door of the school, into the cool afternoon light. He stood on the sidewalk alone, taking in the breeze, the quiet rustling of leaves above. For the first time that day, he smiled. Just a little. Just enough. Back inside, the principal, who had barely looked up from her phone during most of the show, walked over to Mrs. Reynolds. "Why didn't you tell me he could play like that?" she asked, almost stunned. Mrs. Reynolds couldn't answer. Because she didn't know. Because she hadn't cared to know. And that truth. It sat on her shoulders like a stone. Later that afternoon, Malik sat at home on the porch steps, his violin case beside him. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm glow across the quiet street. He thought about his dad, how he used to say, "People don't always listen, son. But when they finally do, make sure you have something worth saying." Malik had said it. And they had listened. The next day at school, something felt different. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was there. Malik stepped off the bus just like always, violin case in hand, hoodie pulled low over his eyes. But this time, no one laughed. No one mocked him. No one mimicked the violin behind his back. Some kids actually moved aside to let him pass. He walked the same halls, but now, teachers turned their heads as he passed. Some nodded. Others smiled, awkward and unsure, like they suddenly realized they hadn't really seen him until now. Even Mrs. Reynolds paused outside her classroom door when she spotted him. She didn't speak. Just gave a small, sheepish nod and stepped aside to let him in. It wasn't much, but it was the closest thing to an apology she knew how to give. Malik said nothing. He didn't need to. The room was quiet when he entered. The same kids who used to smirk now kept their eyes on their desks. Jake fidgeted with his pen, suddenly not so loud. And Connor, he wouldn't even look at Malik at all. Word had spread. Fast. It wasn't just the kids. By lunchtime, someone had uploaded a shaky phone recording of Malik's performance. Just 2 minutes long. Grainy. The sound a little fuzzy, but the magic was still there. The video was titled, "Kid Shuts Down a Whole Room with Violin." It got shared. Then reshared. Then picked up by a local blog. By the time Malik got home, his phone buzzed with notifications. A message from a music teacher in the next town over, "Incredible talent. Do you take lessons?" A DM from a community youth orchestra, "Would love to invite you to audition." Even one from a local news anchor, "We'd love to hear your story, Malik. You've inspired a lot of people." Malik read them all in silence. Then he put the phone down. He didn't want the attention. He never did. He just wanted to be heard. That night at dinner, his mother placed her hand over his and said quietly, "Your father would have been proud." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were strong. Malik just nodded. No words came, but he felt them inside. Heavy, warm, whole. And upstairs, tucked safely in its case, the violin waited. Not for a performance, but for the next truth he needed to tell. It's funny how one moment can change everything. The school never officially apologized. No speeches. No grand announcements. But changes started appearing, in small, quiet ways. The morning announcements began highlighting student achievements, not just the athletes or the debate team, but the artists, the musicians, the overlooked. A flyer went up outside the front office, "Spring Music Showcase, all styles welcome." And in the corner, barely visible, it read, "Featuring Malik J." Some kids signed up out of curiosity. Others out of respect. But everyone knew who the heart of that stage would be. Even Jake and Connor showed up for the showcase. Not to laugh, not to sabotage, but to watch. And when Malik walked out onto that stage again, violin in hand, the room gave him a standing ovation before he played a single note. This time, he smiled. And this time, he looked right at them. The piece he played was slow, gentle, something he had written himself. It had no title. But everyone in the room felt it. Felt the journey, the fight, the dignity he never let go of. Not even when they tried to take it from him. When it was over, no one moved. Then, slowly, hands rose. First applause. Then cheers. Not for a spectacle, but for a soul. A few weeks later, the school district awarded Malik a community music scholarship. Local businesses donated to help him get private lessons. A retired violinist even offered to mentor him, free of charge, he said. "It's the least we can do." And though Malik accepted these gifts humbly, he never once forgot what it took to get there. Because for every cheer, there had been a joke. For every stage, a hallway of whispers. For every compliment, a moment of silence where they let the worst parts of them speak louder than their better selves. But he rose anyway. Not because he wanted revenge. Because he wanted respect. And slowly, he got it. One day, Malik stayed after class to tune his violin, and Mrs. Reynolds approached him. She didn't bring up what happened. She didn't try to explain. All she said was, "You taught us something we'll never forget." Malik nodded politely. "I wasn't trying to teach," he said softly. "Just trying to be heard." That line stuck with her for weeks. Years, even. And for every student who walked through her door after that day, she made sure of one thing. That no one would be laughed onto a stage again. Sometimes, the ones we ignore have the loudest songs to sing, if only we stop long enough to listen. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of the quiet strength we often overlook, then take a moment right now. Like the video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more stories that speak to the soul. Because somewhere out there, another voice is waiting to be heard, and with your help, we just might help them find their stage. Thank you for watching, and thank you for listening with an open heart.